So again, focusing on that very important third paragraph in Epicurus, he continues, "For life has no terror, for those who thoroughly apprehend that there are no terrors for them in ceasing to live. Foolish, therefore, is the person who says that he fears death, not because it will pain when it comes, but because it pains in the prospect." Let's think about that last sentence. Foolish is the person who says that he fears death, not because it pains, not because it will pain when it comes, but because it pains in the prospect. That is, that pain in the prospect. If you and I spend time thinking about death, which we should. I mean, that's why we're here, and Epicurus is certainly not, I think, saying don't think about death, but think about it clearly. Think about it for what it actually is. If we think about it in such a way that we cause ourselves suffering, pain, anxiety, apprehension, we are causing needless suffering in ourselves. That's the pain in the prospect of death. Death itself, the actual event of death, will not pain when it comes. That is, death, again, is the privation of all awareness. Death is the end of all awareness, the end of consciousness. So there is a logical absurdity, I think he's saying, in saying that it will be a painful thing, because it will be nothing. It will not be something that we actually experience. So if we waste time thinking about death in a negative way, that is, thinking about it falsely, we will cause needless suffering in ourselves. And as we will see if we look at the rest of the letter a little bit, that is exactly what we shouldn't do in life. This notion, how to live a happy life. Causing ourselves needless pain and suffering is exactly the wrong thing to do. But let's finish this paragraph, because he does put the argument in a couple of different ways here, or additional ways that I think clarify his point. He continues, "Whatever causes no annoyance when it is present causes only a groundless pain in the expectation." Again, that's much clearer than I could put it. That is the notion that something that itself causes no annoyance, no pain. It would be a groundless pain to be apprehensive about it, the expectation. Death, therefore, the most awful of evils, is nothing to us, seeing that when we are, death is not come, and when death is come, we are not. That seems to be the clearest expression of Epicurus' point about death, his attempt to clarify death. That when we are, when we exist, as you and I now exist as human beings, death is not come. That's a logical necessity. As long as we are, death, which is our non-being, has not yet come. And when death has come, when the event happens, we are not. That seems to be the rock bottom of Epicurus' argument. That is, that life and death are logically incompatible. Anything that is in life is something that we need to deal with. It can be good for us, it can be bad for us, it can be neutral for us, but it is something that is part of our consciousness, part of our awareness, part of our experience as living things. Anything that is not part of that experience, anything that is outside that experience, is nothing to us. And death, because it is the logical contrary, one might say, of life, is not part of that experience. When we are, death has not yet come. When death comes, we are not. It is nothing then, either to the living or to the dead. It is when we're alive, death is nothing to us. When we're dead, because we have no consciousness, no awareness, death is nothing to us. So really, I think he's saying, what are we worried about? It is nothing then, either to the living or to the dead, for with the living it is not, and the dead exists no longer. But in the world, at one time people shunned death as the greatest of all evils, and another time choose it as a respite from the evils in life. The wise person does not deprecate life, nor does he fear the cessation of life. The thought of life is no offense to him, nor is the cessation of life regarded as an evil. And even as people choose of food not merely and simply the larger portion, but the more pleasant, so the wise seek to enjoy the time which is most pleasant, and not merely that which is longest. So I think there is a reference to his larger philosophy of life. And that is, what is life about? And that is something you can certainly find out for yourself, of course, from reading the rest of the letter, which is quite clear and quite simple. The sum and end of a happy life, the end of all our actions, the end being the purpose, the goal, he says, is to be free from pain and fear. And the flip side of that being pleasure and happiness. That is, what do we really want out of life? He says pleasure, but what does he mean by pleasure? That's not just physical pleasure, as he makes clear later on. The kinds of pleasures that he thinks are the most valuable, that actually make a happy life, are not merely the physical pleasures. But he does say in the third long paragraph on the second page, we call pleasure the alpha and omega of a happy life, the beginning and the end of a happy life. Pleasure is our first and kindred good. Of course, there are pleasures of all sorts. There are the pleasures of the body, and those are important pleasures. And there are pains of the body to avoid. Those are important pains, but the pleasures of the body are not the end-all and be-all. What he seems to be saying is that the greatest pleasure is a kind of a philosophical pleasure, and that is the pleasure of a tranquil mind, as he puts it. It's a very sort of rough and ready here philosophy of life, but we can sort of see where he's going. If the object of our lives is to be happy, and that part of happiness is, living a pleasant life and avoiding pain, avoiding suffering. And if death really is nothing, that is, it's nothing to us in the sense that it's not something, strictly speaking, that we ever experience, then why would we needlessly make ourselves unhappy? Why would we spend time worrying, suffering, feeling pain about something which is not in itself painful, something which entails no suffering? It would be like dreading and apprehending some event in our lives and spending a lot of time suffering because of it, in anticipation of it, and then finding out either that it was nothing, that it wasn't important, or that it was positively pleasurable. I mean, he's not saying it about death, but as an example, we would consider that wasted time. We would consider that needless suffering if it turned out that an event that we were dreading was really not so bad. Why would we do that to ourselves with regard to death? If we clarify our thoughts, Epicurus is saying, and certainly this philosophy of death is just our starting point, not the end-all and be-all of our conception of death in the class. We'll certainly read many things which seek to depart from, criticize Epicurus' notion of death. But if we have, in Epicurean terms, clarified our notion of death, then what we see is that there is nothing to be afraid of, there is nothing to fear, there is nothing to be apprehensive about, because to dread it, to be fearful of it, to be apprehensive about it, would be to be apprehensive and fearful about nothing.